Hey, lovely ladies, me again. Just to let you know, for one final time, Alicia and I are going to try and log on together so we can have this conversation. And again, sincere apologies to anyone that's taken the time to watch this. I love it. I can't see you, but in all due respect, that's absolutely fine. We're on and I can hear you, which is the main thing.
Okay, fabulous.
Brilliant. We
Fabulous.
got there in the end. I
Uh-huh.
just said to the lovely ladies, I had no idea what was going on with the technical side, but never
You're not
mind.
going to believe
We'll...
it. So I was trying to join with my computer before, and this time I've joined with my phone. Like it didn't even come up on my computer before. Now, phone.
Weird. It's so weird, isn't it? I just have no words sometimes. You know, when you think you've got it sorted, you're like, yeah, I can do that. And then when you try and do it, it just doesn't happen. But we got there in the end, which is the main thing, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Fabulous.
Kids these days would be laughing at us going, oh.
Yeah, I know, exactly. No, thank you so much for joining me, Alissia. And firstly, sincere apologies. You mentioned that you're not based in New Zealand, it's Australia. So it was kind of close, but not close. But apologies, I got that wrong.
Not at all, not at all. We're pretty much cousins, so that's fine.
Yeah, very true. Alicia, for anyone that's hopefully watching, what I wanted to do is just have, you know, a nice little informal conversation, really, obviously about your experience of domestic abuse. Please
Yep.
say as little or as much as you feel comfortable doing. And yeah, we'll just kind of have a chat, let the chat evolve. And I'm sure your experiences will really help the lovely ladies in this group today. So as I said again, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
No, not at all. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Lovely. So firstly, are you just happy just to tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of where you're from, just to confirm again, and just anything that you feel is relevant to the ladies today?
Absolutely. Yep. So my name's Alissia and I am from Australia. I live about 2 hours outside of Melbourne, and I've been, I guess what you call free of my situation, and yeah, rebuilding myself, and what I'd call, well, I'd say free of myself, free of my situation for about 6 years now, and in a really good space. And over that time, been rebuilding myself, but yeah, in a really good place for the last 3 or 4 years. So yeah.
Amazing. That's brilliant. Yeah, fantastic. And Elisa, if you don't mind explaining, what did that abuse look like for you? You know, was it emotional, physical? You know, can you just give us sort of, I guess, a bit of detail, as much detail again as you feel you would like to, sort of around that relationship?
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I guess it's not what people would think of in traditional terms. It wasn't physical per se. It was mental abuse, mental and emotional abuse, and financial abuse. So he really picked me apart as an individual, to the point where I didn't recognize myself at the end. My family couldn't recognize me, and they actually couldn't recognize me as a person. Emotionally, I was torn apart. When I eventually came home, I was abandoned in a foreign country. One day he just walked out the door after his job was complete. And yeah, I was left in a very precarious situation, obviously not having any financial means to support myself. And that left me in a position where when my mother eventually came over and did get me, I'd lost about, I think I was down to about 45 kilos. So yeah, she was horrified when she did come and find me and get me.
Imagine.
Yeah,
I can imagine. And was that sort of progressive? I mean, you know, the kind of the narrative goes, doesn't it? Is the abuser kind of doesn't, you know, they don't start showing you the real them on day one, do they? So for you, was that kind of, you know, over time that you kind of was subject to that kind of abuse?
Very much so. It was very methodical. I never would have guessed that I would end up in a situation like that. To give you clarity of my whole situation, I have a background of I'm a qualified criminal intelligence analyst. So for me to end up in that situation really destroyed me as a person, and to have trust in myself as well, because I thought, how could someone with that education and that essentially that job, analyzing people, analyzing criminals, analyzing those kind of people, how could I miss all of those red flags. How could I fall into that situation?
Yeah.
But
yeah, but you know what, like, you know, I'm sure in hindsight, hopefully you understand this now, but the abusers are so manipulative, aren't they? You
so
just, it can
yeah,
literally happen to anyone. You know, there's no kind of, you know,
no,
stereotypical
there's not.
person, is there, that
There's not.
this
And
abuse
they're very good at
happens
targeting
to?
what they look for. I can see
Yeah.
now with myself what made me a good target, which was I was somebody that was quite needy and desperate for love for a number of reasons, which stemmed to my earlier life, I guess. But yeah, like I said, it was very methodical abuse that started with little things, just little comments.
Mm.
Actually,
Mm.
if I go back before that, it probably started with isolation.
Okay.
But isolation that you wouldn't think of. So I was moved essentially, which seemed like a great idea at the time, was moved away from my family to another country, which seemed like a really exciting idea. It's brilliant. We're going to be together. We're going to start a new life. And it was, I loved it all. But in that isolation came the difficulties, because suddenly he was able to alienate me from, in a way, from my family. I had no friend. I had friends there. I had no support structure, including base things like my GPs, everything. Your life is made up of everything from your family, your friends,
Yeah.
but also your social network of things that are really important to you, your job. I wasn't allowed to work under the guise of, you know, but I earn enough money, I'd like you to be a housewife. It's very prestigious, that kind of thing. But with that financial control,
Yeah. And
where
again, I think often, you know, I think that kind of narrative from their perspective is actually under the guise of being very caring, loving. You know, you don't need to do that. You sit and do, you know, rest, or I can like, you know, provide. And you're like, oh, that's lovely. But you know, actually there is often, not all the time, but often a different motive, isn't there?
yeah, there's a very different motive. And I think even at the end of the journey, even now, people like us are never going to understand what's behind it. That's got to do with them and their own thing. But it's coming to the acceptance of that. I'm never going to understand that. That is his own story, for whatever reasons that comes from. I think it's about learning to overcome that. One of the biggest things was being able to be able to get to this point where we can talk about it, because often our societal structures, as you know, the court systems, where you think they would be within favour, but often, you know, family structures as well, whether that be, often it can be cultural, sometimes it can be family. There's a lot of shame built around that.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, actually, because it's something that we all kind of feel quite literally, don't we, sadly, that we can't talk out, or even especially I think sometimes with the emotional abuse, because we're like, sometimes it's hard to explain ourselves, isn't it? So we think, well, if I try and explain to family or friends, they wouldn't understand, because we can barely get our heads around it ourselves, like what happened, how it happened, how it evolved. And sometimes that stops us speaking out. You know, there's, as you rightly said, there's lots of different reasons, isn't there? But I think it's why the conversations like we're literally having this morning are so important, because it will help people hopefully understand the kind of the different behaviours, and that also, more importantly, there is a life after that abuse as well.
Absolutely. One of the biggest things actually is that comes with it is getting over that hurdle. So I still have people within my family that they can't grasp it, or I guess it's what you call deny that it was abuse. They can't class it within their own framework as abuse, for their own reasons, for their own stories. But
that's hard, isn't it, actually?
Yeah, and that's a really hard thing to accept. But the more that I speak my truth and voice it, and it's not for anyone else, it's not for their clarification, but it's owning my story so that I can move on, which is really important to me. And it also gives voice to and recognition to people like me and other women, so that they have the courage to come forward and go, actually, what happened wasn't right. Like, I lost who I was as a person. And being able to come forward and recognize that I'm stronger now than I ever was, to be able to get through that, rebuild myself step by step, you know, come out the other side knowing that you know, I'm one resilient woman,
Oh
you know,
God,
and
absolutely. And I know from the first time we spoke, I was like genuinely like in awe of you. And I've never actually told this to you, so you're probably like, oh, this is a bit of a surprise. But I am in awe of you as an individual, what you've been through, how you come out. You've been through a lot, you know, personal note, abuse, that abusive relationship, and everything else. And I just think it's so courageous, brave, inspirational, motivating, lots of really, you know, fantastic things that you are still telling your story and feel able to tell your story, because like you said, we don't often know the ripple effect that has, but personally you can just imagine people kind of going, wow, Alicia's done that, that's amazing, I can do that. And it gives people that hope, doesn't it? And I think in situations like this, when you feel there is no hope, like how am I going to get out, how am I going to do this, how am I going to do it alone, there's so many questions we ask ourselves. I think stories like yours are so important, because they give that hope and faith that things can be okay.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, we all have our own individual stories, and I think, you know, like I said, there can be a lot of shame, particularly when you don't have the physical bruises. There's that mental shame that we put on ourselves. I was at a place when I came home that I ended up collapsing to a place where, you know, I couldn't even leave the house. I couldn't hold conversations. I was housebound. I almost had agoraphobia. I ended up trying to take my life from it, because I just, there was no individual left.
Yeah.
I couldn't recognize who that was anymore. And being able to rebuild that person, you know, it took a long time.
Yeah, of course.
One of the things that I was thinking, sorry, I've just lost my train of thought for a second.
That's okay.
One of the, we're often stuck in that survival mode, both within the situation, but it's not like you get out of it and you think, okay, well, it's all better now, I'm out of that. We're still stuck in that survival mode for so long, because our brains are wired that way. We've been in it for such a long time, and even the smallest things trigger it. And one of the things that made me recognize that I was in that mode was I actually had no emotion left. I had two emotions, which was nothing or anger. It was the only thing I could feel. And not only that, I couldn't recognize emotions on other people besides base emotions of happiness. I could verbalize that happiness was an emotion.
Yeah.
It was not something I felt. I knew sadness was an emotion, and anger. Three emotions was all I could recognize. Now there's over at least 20 to 30 different emotions.
Yeah.
But my inability to recognize them made me realize that there was a problem that I needed to work on.
Yeah. How do you start working on that? I mean, I think, you know, from what you've just said there, like this relationship had literally stripped you back in terms of, you know, personality, identity, you know, probably like your soul, if you know what I mean. It can often strip you right back to kind of nothing, isn't it? Like you've literally just described. I mean, how do you even start to kind of go, right, this can get better, or, you know, what do I need to do? I mean, what did that kind of look like for you, that, I guess, that thought process?
Yeah. So it's, you know, I'm not going to lie, for me it was therapy, and it was quite a lot of therapy. I also did something called dialectical behavior therapy, which was for me great. In fact, I going through the process, it made me realize that perhaps it's something that should be taught in schools, because it had a lot to do with radical acceptance, which is a big one. And that helped me learn, because at that time I was still chasing the answers. But why did this happen? Why did he do this? Why did he do this? And once I got to the point that I realized, well, I'm actually never going to understand why he did that, but it did happen to me. It doesn't mean what happened to me was acceptable in any way, shape, or form, but it is something that happened. I was able to start to move on. Some of the other lessons that I began to learn from it was obviously the emotions and how to process them, how to get in touch with them. Mindfulness was a really big part of it, and learning how to implement those mindfulness skills was a massive thing. And interpersonal relationships, and with that started me on the path of learning how to implement boundaries, which is obviously something I never had in the past. So
Yeah.
yeah, that, and then being able to, I guess, sit with the deeper questions within myself. Well, what led me down that path in the first place? How did I end up in this situation? So, you know, when you're able to start doing that, but, you know, that's a long way down the path. And, you know, the word journey is a bit of a cliche these days, but it is a journey. And
It is,
healing
isn't
is,
it? I agree.
healing is a journey.
Yeah,
And
and
there's a
I
lot of
agree.
steps.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Alissia, 100% with that. And I think a lot of the narrative sort of out there is like, well, they've left now, so
No.
you know, back to business as usual. Whereas it's so not like that, isn't it? You know, I think sometimes it can take months, sometimes it can take years down the line to actually regain ourselves. And I think it's actually getting that narrative out there, and it's something, you know, I don't know if you agree, but I'm personally really passionate about, because a lot of women put pressure on themselves to go, well, it's obviously me then, because I'm not feeling better, I don't know who I am still, I don't have the confidence like I used to have, and they kind of put so much pressure on themselves to regain themselves, their life, everything they lost within such a short space of time, that it actually detracts from that healing, because there is so much overwhelm. Whereas actually, when we kind of almost release that pressure and just go, look, one step at a time, one day at a time, you know, let things evolve. And as you said, it can be lots of things that can help, I think, can't it? It's not just one method, one practice, one thing.
Oh, no.
It's a multiple, isn't it?
Yeah, from my perspective, it's never going to be one thing. It's so many things. And for me, for me, it was a solid 2 years before, you know, I even started to regain who I was. So it's not a short process, but it's well worth it, and it's worth continuing down that path, and not forgetting while you're headed down that path to celebrate the little wins. Because healing isn't linear, which, you know, I think people think, okay, well, you know, it's like the process of grief, and grieving is part of the process as well. You know, but
it's often underplayed, isn't it, actually, that side of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Definitely.
think another part of it is looking at who we surround ourselves with. That's a really big part. Obviously, we need some core people around us. Obviously, specialists is going to be a part of it, you know, whether that's your GP to some sort of therapist, but one or two really good friends, someone that you can talk to about it. I'm not talking all the time either, but someone to go out and do the nice things, have a cup of tea with, whether that's at their house, at a local cafe, go for a walk with around the lake, or around the lake. Obviously, I have a lake to walk around.
Yeah, you've got a beautiful lake. Yeah, absolutely. And no, as you said, it's just enjoying the finer things, I think, sometimes, isn't it? As you said, fresh air, you know, nature, stripping everything back to basics, really.
Yeah, you have to. You have to.
Yeah, definitely. And on your, I guess, your sort of journey, Alicia, did you have the support? I mean, when you left the relationship, you mentioned obviously your mum being there for you. Do you feel like you had the support you would have needed or wanted, or has this been very much a sort of, you know, done on like by yourself on an individual note? And if so, has that kind of helped you think more than if you had lots of people around you, kind of maybe with different narratives, different opinions?
Yeah. I think initially when I left, when he walked out the door, there was nothing, and I was in a place where I was very isolated. Then I had one lady who stepped up, and in my chapter in the book, I actually call it an angel appears, and I was very lucky because she was the first person who, I guess, showed me that there was still goodness in the world, that there was still goodness in humanity. And it was at a time when I really lost hope in people, in humankind, and I'd lost all of that. So that was the first thing. And then obviously my mum came to get me and brought me back home. And then I was here for probably 6 or 7 months before, maybe less than that, let's say the 6-month mark, before I tried to take my life. And then once I was in the hospital, you know, I'd sort of had the epiphany where I realized I couldn't do this. I couldn't put my family through it. And it was then that I put my hand up and said to the hospital staff, or or the mental health team that came, okay, something's got to change. I don't care what it is, but get me the help that I need.
Yeah.
And it was good enough, but I kept advocating for myself, which is a really big thing. You have to be prepared to advocate for yourself. And I'm not saying that the first teens that come along are going to be right for you, or you're going to click with them, but keep pushing, keep finding those people that are right for you.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I think often it can be quite isolating, can't it? And I think, just, I guess for me on a personal note, I had lots of family, lots of friends around me. And as lovely as they all are, I think you touched on it slightly before, Alissia, about some people just don't get it because it wasn't bruises, it was nothing visible. And so there was, like yourself, me and rock bottom, and they were like, well, hang on a minute, like, why why are you feeling like this? He's gone, and X, Y, and Z. And I think, like I said, you have to kind of just believe in your experience, isn't it? And believe in the truth of what that looks like, and just believe that actually what happened to you wasn't right. And yes, sadly, other people will always have opinions, different narratives, won't they? But actually, it's just knowing in your heart of hearts you deserve the help, the support that you're requesting for real, genuine reasons.
Yeah. And that's a lot of what I talk about voicing your truth and really coming to own your story, because I mean, the only person at the end of the day that needs to understand it is you. It's not about validation from anyone else, but once you come to that point where you do understand, but then are able to move past it. I'm not saying own it in a victim mentality mode, but in a way that allows you to, okay, this is what happened. Now what are my next steps? Because there will always, the world is made up of, hundreds of thousands of people. There are always going to be people that don't understand or doubt you. And, sometimes I wonder if the mental and emotional abuse is almost worse than sometimes the physical abuse, because it can't be seen. And, you said it there, okay, he's gone now, or he's out of your life. But at the end of the day, so was I. There was nothing left. There was no person left.
Literally that, isn't it? And I think, as I touched on before, I think it's so insidious, isn't it? It's manipulative, you've got coercive control. There's so many different aspects that don't just happen overnight. It's a passive behavior over time, isn't it? Or a narrative they provide us over time. I think for a survivor of that, it's hard to understand. And I don't know, did you when you were in that situation, Alissia, if you don't mind me asking, did you kind of know, or part of you kind of know, perhaps like your gut instinct, know what was going on? Or was it not till you kind of left that you had like the epiphany, i.e. God, this is a reality?
There was probably one or two red flags early on, and I sort of brushed them aside, like, no, that's not what it is. And then I honestly had no clue. And then I found I actually caught him in a lie one day, long time into our relationship, and it was just like pulling on a thread, and my life just unraveled. And with that unraveling came the anger, and it wasn't long. It was about, with that, I started to realize then, because I realized that the lies were there, what the extent of the lies, down to the point that he'd told friends that I'd made over there not to contact me, like literally, because I'd went and said to one of them after about 6 months, why haven't you called? And I knew that he'd told me that I wasn't to contact any of them, but when I went around there and then they had been told that they weren't allowed to contact me, I was just gobsmacked. And that's when I started to realize that things were really unhealthy. So
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, obviously we've spoken briefly before this live about the wonderful videos you do on Instagram, just, nice, like, supportive advice, just real, for me personally, just really mindful, kind of thought-provoking videos every morning. So I mean, how have you learned that wisdom? Again, has it just been kind of through like self-taught, or has it again been through the different practices?
I'd say it's a bit of a combination of both. I guess it's a matter of some of it was taught, and then a lot of it was putting it into practice and working out what worked for me.
Yeah.
So I went what over time. And don't get me wrong, those practices haven't stopped. They're still practices I do today, and there's ones that I'm finding, new ones that I'm finding today, you know, that I'll probably talk about in 6 months time, that you know, I think are wonderful. And there's all, like I said, it's a journey, and it's never changing. I think we always learn things about ourselves, and where we are. Like that saying, isn't it? Students ready, the teacher will appear.
Yeah. No, absolutely that. And I think it's you know, it's a bit cliche in this circumstance, but I think every day is a school day, isn't it? Especially when you are healing, because you're literally relearning who you are on an individual basis, but at the same time relearning literally about life, isn't it? You know, kind of literally rebuilding the whole portfolio from literally a blank canvas, isn't it, in effect?
Definitely.
Yeah. And Alissia, is there anything that you've done or you continue to do today, just whether that's just any wisdom you want to share, or any practices that, or just general advice that you'd be happy to share with the ladies today, just for those maybe that are watching or watch this on replay that just feel actually I just don't even know where to start, like, you know, I feel in this excuse me, in this hole. How would you start to kind of take that first step to kind of literally regaining yourself?
Yeah. So there's probably a couple of things. It would be to start advocating for yourself, whether that's reaching out to even your GP. Your GP is probably a best place to start, because, you know, they are confidential. They should certainly be confidential, and they usually have a lot of resources at their hand. And the other thing that I think that you can do for yourself, is start to write things down. You know, your story may never be published, you know, or you may not want it to be published, but it's really will give you clarity and give story to your voice for yourself, and about owning that truth for yourself, which I think is really important.
Definitely. And have you found, I know, you know, you're wonderful co-author of the Start Over Book Series with myself, have you found writing your story down, you know, helpful, healing, you know, in terms of your journey?
Absolutely. And not only was it healing, that again, I thought my story was, you know, one part, and that I'd gone to a certain part of healing, and that's what it was. But once I'd started to write it, it actually made me sit there, and I learned other stuff about myself in writing it, that again, well, what led to that? And it brought up a whole lot of other things, but working through that, I was able to heal that from my earlier life, which I'd never even realized before. So
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think that that kind of like journaling, you know, as you said, writing down that story, it really opens up a real wider thought process, doesn't it? Not even just about the story, but almost connecting the dots to how did I get here, you know, kind of what kind of patterns of behavior, perhaps childhood or, you know, recent adult years have kind of led to that. And it's almost like lots of light bulbs kind of going off, I think, kind of like, oh God, yeah. And it actually is, it's quite hard, isn't it, writing stuff down, because those emotions I found personally are brought to the fore. But I think if you can sit with that and manage that appropriately and work through that, I think the end result is just has such an immense effect, doesn't it?
absolutely. I think it's another way of being able to ask yourself those deeper questions and sit with them, and often you are, you know, able to come up with the answers for yourself, which is often essentially what we go to a therapist for. But you know, the answers are within ourselves. I mean, what I found is we go to a therapist, and they're the questions that they're asking us, and it's the questions that we want.
So true. No, definitely. And I think it's empowering, isn't it, as well, to kind of, it's hard, don't get me wrong, I think it's really hard to sit with what we've been through and to think about it, because our natural instinct is probably just to go, no, shut that off, can't deal with that, that's really difficult, I'll, you know, put that to bed, so to speak. But I think if we can, in the right environment, whether that's alone or perhaps with a trusted friend, family member, with the GP, you know, even with the therapist, kind of have these open conversations, or literally, you know, write down what that conversation would be with ourselves. It's so empowering, and it gives us that kind of confidence back again, I think, because those that different perspective that writing or talking about it brings actually brings a sense of, oh right, okay, it wasn't me. Oh well, yeah, I didn't deserve that, did I? And it's that in itself is just such a relief to not actually be blaming ourselves, take that guilt and that shame away, but also to realize that we in essence did nothing wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is, often we do avoid it, but in avoiding it, when we're not really avoiding it, because it's there all the time. It's something that we're it's essentially like a big box in the middle of the room that we're circling. But if you just sort of lean into that discomfort, it actually resolves it and goes away exactly by everything that you described.
Yeah, that's a
It's
really good
actually
point, actually.
it's a much quicker process than avoiding it for what can be years sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Alicia, I know you are really into kind of the neuroplasticity side, which is like the brain functioning, etc., which I find fascinating. And I'll be honest, I don't know anywhere near as much as you do about that side. But I know you've got a podcast coming out soon, The Truth Effect. So can you tell us just a bit about that, kind of what you will be discussing on that podcast?
Yeah, so my podcast, essentially what I talk about on that is how our history plays into our individual personalities, especially things like resilience. But one of the topics that I will be discussing is neuroplasticity, and they may seem poles apart, but the specialist that I'm getting on to talk about that is Dr. Brodie. His last name is it Brodie Miller?
Yeah, as far as I know.
Completely slipped my mind there. Dr. Brodie Miller. Now he's one of our co-authors as well, but his story is that he actually suffered a brain injury when he was younger, and he's now a brain specialist. And the reason that neuroplasticity fascinates me is because essentially what it is a way that we can rewire, and the ability for the brain to rewire itself. And it was something that I learned about in the healing process that we went through. One of the things that I developed when I had my breakdown was I actually also developed fibromyalgia. My body just completely shut down, and it was like my body saying, no, enough is enough. So along with everything else I had chronic pain. I couldn't move, and that's where the neuroplasticity really came in. It was about learning to getting my brain to fire in other ways, make new connections so that it didn't work that way anymore. And where the history comes into that is, well, what led to that? And it was years of repeated patterns, and where did those patterns come from in the beginning? So that's what I talk about on the podcast, how years of history, our history plays into the development of our individual personalities.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? And I think again that's a subject that's often not associated with abuse. I'll be perfectly honest with you, from my perspective, my learning anyway, Alissia. But I think actually what you've just said, it's that past that within reason dictates our future, isn't it? Our thought processes, mindset, patterns of behaviour, etc., that actually, rightly or wrongly, puts us sometimes into the situation that we've all kind of been in today. So I look out for that podcast. It sounds absolutely fascinating, and just one that actually is going to be really insightful for people like us in this group to actually learn from.
Yeah, and it's not about blame. Again, it's just about acknowledging, because once we acknowledge and we learn from it, it's something that we then have the ability to change.
Yeah, literally that, isn't it? No, absolutely. And is there anything you want to share with the ladies, just on a final note? I mean, I could talk to you all day, because I think you're absolutely fascinating. The knowledge you have around kind of the healing, transformational side is just amazing. But is there anything you'd like to share with the ladies today, just on a final point, that will kind of give those people that are perhaps really struggling at the moment some hope to know that actually things can get better?
Yeah, 100%. Just don't give up, ladies. I am someone that was at that point, and I took the worst possible, what I thought was the way out and the only solution, and it's not the solution. So my word of advice is, don't give up. And with that, I promise that you just never know what is coming around the corner. And although you think that from the years and years and years probably of the patterns that you've been through, it's potentially worse, the thing is it's also potentially really good. And one thing that I've learned is that 20 years of repeated patterns for me, which culminated in something horrendous, actually led me and was leading me to the best place in my life. And I know that seems, you know, well, how could that be? But it's almost like it led me through the fire to be the person that I'm meant to be today.
Yeah, and I love that, because often it's really hard when you're in it to see that path out, isn't it? As you literally said, through that fire, it's hard to see that other side, but it is possible, isn't it? And you are literally living proof that you can go from literally that rock bottom, you know, had enough of everything, to doing all the wonderful things that you are now. And all credit to you, because it's not easy, is it? But actually it's more than possible.
No, no. And yeah, there are people out there that love you. There are people out there that understand you, and yeah, you can do it.
Thank you, Alissia. That's beautiful words. It's given me goosebumps, actually, as you were saying that. But no, you're absolutely right. I think a lot of things in life are temporary, aren't they? And it's hard to recognise that in the moment, because we've got so much emotion attached to that. But I think there is always hope, and there's always that light literally at the end of the tunnel, isn't it? And with the right support, right people around you, you know, right sort of personal practices to learn and develop, I think it's more than possible to go on to lead a fulfilled life. So thank you so much for sharing your story and just being so honest and just raw with your feelings at that time, and obviously what you've done thereafter. I've personally learned some stuff today, Alissia, so I really appreciate you joining us. So thank you so much.
Not at all. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. You're welcome, my lovely. If anyone wants to connect you, what I was going to suggest, if it's okay with you, Alissia, I'll put some your social media handles at the bottom of this conversation. And when your podcast comes out, if you've already got the link to the website now, if you want to share that, or I can share that for you, then we can do that so people can reach out to you. Okay?
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, my lovely. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.